Hello and welcome to Technically Baltimore's The Look Ahead.
Thanks,
I'm
Dante.
Dante,
Thanks for having me.
and thank you for coming, Jason. I'm Donte Kirby, reporter with Technically, and this series will exploring the theme of the new normal and discussing the lessons we've learned from 2020. And today, my guest is Jason Hardebeck, Baltimore's Director of Broadband and Digital Equity. And for those who aren't lucky enough to have one, can you sort of like give us a quick summary of like what is a director of broadband digital equity and even a bit about who Jason Hardebeck is?
Sure. The bit about what this role is still, some of it is actually getting figured out as we go. It's like a startup, right? You have a general idea what you want to accomplish, and then when you're faced with reality, you figure out what works and what doesn't. The idea behind this role is recognizing that broadband is more than just physical infrastructure. It's also the use, right? So the digital equity piece is what I say is that's the why behind broadband. And so recognizing that we really need to take a look at the entire system, not just how people get better internet or have more choices. It's what are we able to do with that. So this is an effort by Mayor Scott to really provide focus on some of these structural issues, and we can get into more detail on that, I think, later. But as for myself, I have been I'm not originally from Baltimore. I met a girl who was from Baltimore, so that's how I became a Baltimorean many years ago. Most of my career has been in startups in the tech space, number of different roles. And I did actually have a similar role in a previous administration as the city's broadband coordinator back in 2015, 2016 timeframe.
And I guess to sort of talk a bit about your past informing your present, how has it been being the first director of broadband and digital equity, and like where has the lessons from that first position sort of been valuable in this position as it is now?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in some ways, I feel like I've been, training for this role my entire life, right? I mean, I feel like all those different experiences in different aspects of the tech community have really helped inform how I view this role and what this role needs to be. And that really is, in one example is after I sold my first company, I joined the Greater Baltimore Technology Council, and we really were focused on kind of being the cheerleaders, right, for the local tech community, and advocating for startups and that kind of early stage ecosystem. But what we recognized is that there was a lot of people missing from that conversation. As the rest of Baltimore, right? It was really, we're kind of focused on tech as a feature instead of tech as an enabler. And what could we do to expand, make the notion of the ecosystem more inclusive and more diverse, right, and more reflective of Baltimore City's actual population and residents. And that's been part of what I've started to look at, as well as what can I do to help assist with kind of building capacity to support more than just a kind of a vibrant startup community, but actually raise about that tide raising all boats. So I think that's been a big part of my thinking in general, and then specifically with my first stint in City Hall, it was really kind of a science fair experiment, right? There was not a clear mandate. We recognized that Baltimore needed better options for broadband. Broadband, specifically was very critical to support, whether it was a smarter city initiative or any of the growth industries. We knew that broadband was going to be a significant need for the new economy. But what we lacked at the time, I think, was really a broader understanding of what that really meant and what it was going to take. It's a very heavy lift, and part of that has really informed my thinking from then to here is recognizing that this is not something we're going to be able to kind of deal with around the edges. We really need to tackle it as a systemic with systemic change. So it meant going across, not just within city government and across city agencies, but also how do we engage and work with all those external stakeholders as well. And, and then obviously with the last 18 months or so of real world experience in the critical importance of connectivity and internet access, I think that has also really helped galvanize not just my thinking, but everybody's thinking about how we need to think about this going forward.
And I guess when we talk about thinking about it going further in like strategy for the city, I know there's like a big thing of like the first 100 days in office, and I guess where do you feel we're at in terms of the city's broadband and digital equity strategy now that we're like a little past your first 100 days?
Yep. Yes, we are. So we are, I think we're within 60 days or so of being able to release a draft of the city's digital equity plan. That's kind of the tentative, title for public comment and public feedback. One of the reasons for that is that we're really trying to pull, herd a lot of cats and pull a lot of different threads into this, right? It's not just about infrastructure or, devices or, adoption, et cetera. It's all of the above, excuse me. But we also have a pretty significant engineering study underway to look at Baltimore's digital infrastructure and make some recommendations and create some plans on how we build that infrastructure out to support a broader, not just increasing capacity, choice for internet providers, for example, but really how are we going to future-proof our digital infrastructure to not only meet the needs of a pandemic, but thrive and making sure that Baltimore is globally competitive, and both now and in the future. And so it's that I would say the key to this is what we're producing is not a kind of creative writing exercise or a paper or a booklet that sits on the shelf. It's really an action plan, and it really ties into the mayor's action plan as well. That will become, I think, more publicly available over the coming weeks and months. Is how does our broadband and digital equity strategy fit into a bolder vision for Baltimore City? So long way of saying it's coming, and it's coming along well, but there's it's really working across a lot of different agencies and a lot of different stakeholders makes it challenging, I think, to pull together a cohesive and kind of unified view.
And you talked a bit about how you did something similar to this in a different administration, and sort of a bit about how your whole life's been building this, but this is still kind of uncharted territory in terms of government. Like, it's not like every city has digital equity direct there. Like, there's not a lot of models to pull from for this. So I guess, where do you see this position going in the future for like Baltimore and cities like it that might want to follow its lead?
It's a great question. I don't know if this is, maybe the way we think about this is new, but there are, different cities have different approaches, right, to digital equity, broadband, and the like. I think what may be a little different or unique here is that, this is I'm in the mayor's office. It's a cabinet, I would say cabinet level. It's a cabinet level office. It reflects the mayor's belief that this needs to be something that can, we can reach across different agencies. It's not under the IT department, for example, or under any specific agency. It really reflects more of a system-wide approach to this, because this really needs to, again, it's more than just an infrastructure problem. Broadband is the how, but digital equity is the why. And that means we need to figure out how this impacts every part of city government that touches Baltimore City residents and constituents, right? Like digital equity is not a thing you do. It's really more of it's really more something that kind of is imbued into everything we do. I mean, at the end of the day, digital equity is just equity, right? It's really about making sure that everyone has the tools and the opportunities and the access they need to be successful. And I think that's what's probably new. Really the mayor's stated goal and mine as well is the real goal of this is to bridge the digital divide once and for all. That's the ultimate goal. And so recognizing the digital divide is it's a construct of structural inequality means that you have to attack it as, there's system change that needs to happen. And that isn't something that, one person in an office is going to be able to do. It's going to require all of us dismantling and rebuilding, process and making investments that have been missing for generations. So it's the same challenge we have with all the other inequity in the city and other cities, right? It's food insecurity, housing insecurity, public safety challenges. This is all part of that same construct. And so I think that's what will be different perhaps in other cities is thinking about it more as part of a broader system and approach versus an isolated, effort. There is a lot of short-term things we have to do. For example, if there are affordability issues with internet access, right? So there are subsidies and other ways of kind of creating a short-term, filling a short-term gap. But you have to attack the structural issue behind that, right? Those stopgaps only go so far. And what we really need to do is start thinking about it as any city needs to do long-term. How do you fix the underlying problems? And I think that's what's going to happen. So whether this, my role is exactly replicated in other places or it's something similar, who knows? But I think it's just kind of recognizing that there is a problem and an issue that we really need to tackle, across the entire span of government.
And then this 18 months, we've learned a lot, a lot of issues became prominent. So I just wanted to talk a bit about what has 2020 and this beginning half of 2021 taught you?
So obvious ones, right? That I think we knew. I think a lot of us knew, but I don't think we maybe appreciated, like the fact that we're having this conversation, on Zoom, right? And the connectivity is such a critical part of everyday life. And my first stint, I think it was, at least for a lot of us, it was obvious that it was necessary. But I think for a lot of people, it was still kind of viewed as a luxury, right? Or a nice to have. And now I think we all recognize that it's absolutely essential. It really is part of everyday life. And the haves and the have-nots on the digital side are really clear. This has exacerbated all those kind of existing inequities and just made it really visible. You can't unsee it, right? So that's one thing that I think we all learned collectively. I think another thing that I certainly have kind of appreciated more and that we've recognized is that there's so little resilience in our systems, right? We have so many examples over the past 18 months where a seemingly small thing can have such huge effects and cascading effects throughout the system, like a cargo ship in the Suez Canal, right? Or the grid failure in Texas that impacts industries. There's, all these, all of our efforts over the past couple of decades to become more efficient, skinny down supply chains and, our outsourcing efforts have really taken a lot of that resilience out of the system. And so, I think we need to think beyond the kind of single points of failure and the notion that that scarcity, it's like good enough is good enough. It really isn't, right? We're just kind of like stumbling from crisis to crisis unless we start thinking about what the real underlying effects or causes are, and how do we get ahead of that, right? I think that's to me just reinforces this idea that we need to think about future proofing our infrastructure as opposed to just dealing with what we need today.
And I guess to go a little bit more on that future proofing tangent and like what we need to do for our infrastructure. I guess, where do you see city government's role in like internet connectivity and just the digital economy in the next 5, 10, 20 years from now?
It's a great question. I personally believe that if a city government is not actively thinking today about how they're going to build a municipal fiber network to the premise, meaning every address in the city has a fiber or a very real, either an existing fiber connection or a very tangible fiber connection, they're not going to be globally competitive. I mean, I think that means that you have to start thinking about access as critical public infrastructure. I think it means that you cannot rely on the private sector and market forces to solve this problem. Right. I think this is something that is too critical, too important to cities to not treat as the same way we think about electricity, clean water, sewer today. Right. It is just basic infrastructure. If you're going to build a city from scratch today, you would build fiber and you put fiber in the ground alongside all those water pipes and electric lines. Right. Like it would not even be I don't think it'd be a consideration. So the challenge is, for existing cities, right, that, how do you do that after the fact? And I think, up until now, most of those decisions have been kind of like, left to those private providers. And I think that is where we've started to understand that, we really can't afford to just leave it to chance, right? Not just from a digital divide standpoint, but from a competitive standpoint, right? And so I think this is something that is, whether it's, and there's a lot of different flavors of, municipal broadband and municipal networks, right? So won't go into a lot of that, but it needs to be something that cities are taking very deliberate and conscious, giving deliberate and conscious attention to, because it's otherwise, what do you do the next time around? Right. And like we are having conversations about the definition of broadband of, 25.3, right? That was set in 2015. And arguably it was too slow then. Right. And so if that's the baseline, the benchmark we're talking about for an acceptable, connectivity in a city, then I think we're missing the point.
And I guess when you think about Baltimore specifically in this conversation, like, I guess what about it in your mind makes it uniquely prepared to either handle these issues of like connectivity and these, even to a certain extent, the issues around like the consciousness heightened level of public health concern? Like, what about Baltimore makes these hurdles easier to jump over? Like, what about Baltimore and it's like unique that can make some of these challenges able to be solved?
I think that's a fair and an excellent question. And I do think that we do have some unique attributes, kind of a moment in time, right? Like it's not just the pandemic, because that's really, I think everyone has witnessed that, but we've had, let me just back up, 100 years ago, we were pioneering redlining, right, in Baltimore City. Like, so you could argue we invented, that structural, racism and inequity that has resulted in large part has created this existing divide, right, in a lot of different ways. So I think we have come to terms with that as a city, that we need to do better. We have to do better. We have leadership that has a bias for action and making hard decisions, even if they're not easy or they're not fast and convenient, and that are not politically expedient. So we have leadership that gets that this is a challenge that we need to face head on. I think we have unique assets as a city, not just, our kind of human assets, but infrastructure. Like, we are one of the few major cities, if the only major city, that owns its own conduit system, municipal conduit system. We have a lot of existing fiber optic cable in the ground already, right? We have the beginnings of a very substantial, potential for a substantial municipal network. And there is also a significant amount of funding from DC, quite a bit of which has the potential to be used for broadband infrastructure. Right? So we have all these kind of converging, assets and ideas coming. And I think most importantly is we have a broad, I think, understanding across not just all levels of government, but the public sector and our philanthropic sector, where this is something that not only needs to be fixed, but can be fixed now, right? And can be resolved. I think we have that kind of collective will that is certainly different from any time that I can remember, where we just have a very broad consensus that this is the time, right? And so my intent is to work to harness all this this energy and put it towards real long-term lasting solutions.
And as we wrap the interview, is there anything you feel we haven't talked about? Anything you feel people should know about broadband and digital equity in Baltimore?
No, I mean, there are, I will say this, and I've said it before, but I don't see my role as like picking winners and losers, or, I see it as an and versus an or, right? Like, we need all the existing players, but we need new ideas and new players as well, right? The idea is creating additional capacity, additional choice. It's not about whether, someone, a company should be less or more successful. It's really how can we start to treat this as a competitive advantage versus just making incremental increases, slightly higher speed, slightly better pricing, slightly more people. We really need to kind of start from a kind of a different platform or different foundation. I also say this: I think that we need to start thinking about the digital divide as a public health crisis, right? Like, it is broad, far-reaching consequences, right? And I'm not a public health expert by any means, but to me, it feels a lot like what happened with lead paint, right? These unintended consequences, and how that has impacted entire generations of people who have, the lasting long-term effects of that, kind of insidious issue. And, at the risk of making it sound too critical, but I think that there are clear parallels to that. Like, if we're not creating an opportunity for every citizen, every resident of Baltimore City to be a fully participating, full participant in the digital economy, what kind of hope do you have long term? Like, you're outside of opportunities. We need to really start addressing this kind of fundamentally as public health.
And thank you again, Jason, for taking the time to talk to me. And that's been Technically Baltimore Look Ahead. Till next time, stay connected.